you have, that was mentioned earlier, that you do have background in political science. I mean, from a political science point of view, like, how do you feel that the legal systems in Europe are reacting, taking like these asylums, like?
It's really interesting. When I did my PhD, I wanted, first of all, to look at asylum seekers, but I became obsessed with looking at the state. And why does the state promise to grant asylum and then refuse to do so? What's going on here? And during my viva, my external examiner was Robert Miles, who's a famous Marxist theoretician. And Bob Miles said to me, implicit in your thesis, Liza, is a theory of the state. Would you like to elaborate a bit more? And I looked at him and he said, what is your theory of the state? I thought, obviously it's a committee for managing the affairs of the bourgeoisie. After the laughter had died down, he said, are you saying that the state is just a big monolith? And I said, no, actually, it's riven with contradictions. Because on the one hand, it does have built in a commitment to human rights. That's what makes European countries liberal democracies or social democracies. There is a real commitment to human rights. But on the other hand, there seems to be this huge mechanism, this huge infrastructure made to ensure that certain people cannot access those human rights. So there is this real contradiction. And I was talking yesterday to somebody about Frontex, which is now been just called to patrol the border between Greece and Turkey because Greece can't cope anymore. And the European Union has said that Frontex has to have a department that oversees that they adhere to human rights norms. And I'm thinking, hang on a second. They're supposed to be stopping people crossing the frontier between Turkey and Greece, which is a breach of their human rights, but they've got to do it in a human rights friendly way. So there is a problem that there are these contradictions within the state, and those are the contradictions that I think activists and campaigning groups can play on, and have to play on. Campaigning groups have to shine a light on these contradictions, and have to try and use human rights norms as a way of trying to ameliorate the worst effects of the security mentality that drives the larger political agenda.
Do you feel that most states do have a certain number of refugees that they can accept from certain amount of countries? Do you feel that has an implication on who gets in and like how they go about being selected?
I think that countries subscribe to a logic of a threshold of tolerance. And I saw that very clearly in Germany in 92-93, around the debate around asylum, when there was this number, 400,000 asylum seekers that arrived in a single year. And all of the discourse was around, we have reached the threshold of tolerance. We cannot take any more. If people keep coming, the state will collapse. The welfare state will collapse. The liberal state will collapse because we will see more incidents like we did at Hoyerswerda and Rostock-Lichtenhagen when a mob firebombed an asylum hostel and stayed outside it for 3 days, and the police just withdrew. And so there was a real fear that this would happen. But that was 400,000 asylum seekers in 1 year. And actually, the state didn't collapse. Germany is still a relatively stable social democracy. And there's nowhere in Europe that has approached anything like that number. And so, I don't accept this notion that there is a threshold. Partly because I don't accept that we are entitled to protect our standard of living and our wealth at the expense of other people's. And also because, as I've come to know my Afghan friends better, I've discovered that most of them have spent prolonged periods in Iran and in Pakistan. And when two of the poorest countries in the world can respectively host 3 million and 1.5 million Afghan refugees, not to speak of Iraqi refugees, I think we don't have a leg to stand on in Europe as one of the richest parts of the world, saying we can't afford it. political agenda there.
Do you believe that your work has influenced any of the policy making surrounding the refugees, or do you just believe that it's still purely academic?
That's a really hard question. I would love to think it had, but I don't think it does. And it's funny because I suppose as an academic, there's always two strands to our work. One is teaching and one is writing. And I don't know why I'm so obsessed with writing all of this, because I really think it's falling on deaf ears. But I think it's important that there is this voice out there, however extreme I might sound. I think it's important to constantly offer an alternative. But in reality, I guess, my real hope is through my students. I hope that I'm going to actually teach that person, inspire somebody to go out and start the revolution that changes all of this.
Just to wrap it up, what are your ambitions for the future with your work?
Start a revolution.